The recruiting office was dead quiet, save for the rhythmic thrum 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 of the ceiling fan spinning overhead. I had just slammed the receiver down on my father. His curse words were still ringing in my ears, screaming about how I was selfish for not wiring money to cover Liam's gambling debts again. I was reaching for my car keys, ready to drive back to the apartment I still called home, when the desk phone vibrated against the wood. It was not my commanding officer. The caller ID flashed a number I did not recognize. A payphone, Selwood Park, 9 o'clock at night. I picked it up, and my world of rigid discipline collapsed. There were no orders on the other end, just the ragged, terrified breathing of a child. My hand went stiff. The ballpoint pen I was holding snapped in two. The blood rushed to my temples, drowning out the exhaustion and the humiliation from my father's call moments ago. "Sergeant Hill, don't go home, please." Milo's voice tore through my eardrum, loud enough to be heard over the sound of heavy rain in the background. "There is a guy pouring gas around your door. He just said into his phone, 'She is coming back soon. Get ready to light it up.'" I dropped the phone. Goosebumps erupted down my spine, cold as ice. "She is coming back soon?" How did he know? Exactly 2 minutes ago, the only person who had called to ask, "What time are you dragging your ass home?" was my father, Greg. Why did a father's inquiry about his daughter's schedule align so perfectly with the moment a stranger prepared to burn me alive? Tonight, that house was no longer a home. It was a trap. I did not go home. I drove my beat-up Ford 10 miles south, pulling into the flickering neon lot of a Motel 6 off the interstate. The room smelled of cold smoke and bleach, a scent that usually made me gag. But tonight it smelled like safety. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, my service pistol resting on the nightstand next to the Gideon Bible. I did not sleep. I could not close my eyes without hearing Greg's voice from earlier that evening. "You are useless, Carrie. Your brother needs $5,000 to restart his life, and you are sitting on that government paycheck like a miser. I would rather not have a daughter than have one like you." His words burned hotter than any fire. He had killed me in his mind long ago. To him, I was not a daughter. I was a failed investment. I walked to the bathroom mirror and splashed cold water on my face. Under the harsh fluorescent light, the small jagged scar on my forehead stood out. I touched it. I was 10 years old. Liam was 7. He had thrown a heavy die-cast toy truck at my head because I wouldn't let him win a game. Blood had poured down my face. My father did not scold Liam. He scolded me. "You are the older sister, Kiera. You have to yield to him. Don't be so selfish." My entire life had been a series of forced yields. Liam went to a private preparatory school. I went to public school. When Liam graduated high school, barely passing, Dad bought him a brand new BMW with leather seats. When I graduated with honors, I bought my own rusted bicycle from a yard sale with money I earned scrubbing floors at the diner. The injustice had seeped into my marrow over 29 years. It made the impossible thought, "Dad wants to kill me to get money for Liam," seem not only possible, but terrifyingly logical. At 2 in the morning, my cell phone vibrated on the bedspread. It was a text from an unknown number. Milo. "I see the fire, Sergeant. It is big." "I am sorry." I did not cry. My tears had dried up the day I signed my enlistment papers to escape that house. I only felt a glacial coldness spreading from my chest to my limbs. That apartment held the only things I had left of my mother and grandfather. Now, they were ash. And the man holding the lighter, directly or indirectly, shared my last name. I waited out the darkness. At 6 in the morning, I turned on the small television mounted in the corner. The local Portland news anchor was speaking in a somber tone. "Fierce blaze at the Selwood Garden Apartments early this morning. Investigators suspect a gas leak. No casualties reported yet, but the structure is compromised." The camera zoomed in. There it was. My bedroom window. It was nothing but a gaping, blackened maw. The frame was charred, the glass blown out. The fire had started there. If I had gone home when my father asked, if I had followed orders like a good daughter, I would be a charred corpse right now. I turned off the TV. The silence in the motel room was heavy, but my mind was clear. I stood up and reached for my uniform. I buttoned the shirt with steady hands. I laced my boots tight. As I looked at my reflection, I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every person who has ever been the scapegoat. Everyone who was told they were second best. If you know this pain, if you have ever felt like the black sheep who had to become a wolf to survive, hit that like button so I know I am not alone in this room. And if you're ready to see me make them pay, type justice in the comments. I remembered a quote from a lecture I listened to once about how you must confront the monster within yourself to become truly dangerous, truly strong. Today, I would be dangerous. The smell hit me half a mile before I even saw the building. It was a vile, choking cocktail of wet charcoal, melted plastic, and the metallic tang of ozone. It was the scent of my life going up in smoke. I parked my truck 2 blocks away to avoid drawing attention and walked the rest of the distance. The rain had reduced to a drizzle, but it did nothing to wash away the devastation. My apartment complex, a place that had been my sanctuary for 5 years, was a hollowed-out skull. The roof had collapsed inward, and the windows of my second-floor unit were jagged, black holes staring out like dead eyes. "Jesus, Kiara," Mrs. Graceland, my downstairs neighbor, barreled into me before I could cross the street. She was a heavy-set woman in a floral bathrobe, her face streaked with soot and tears. She hugged me so hard I lost my breath. "I thought you were in there," she sobbed into my shoulder. "It went up like a bomb, honey. 1 second it was quiet, the next, boom, the windows just blew out." I patted her back mechanically, my eyes fixed on the charred remains of my bedroom. "I am okay, Mrs. Graceland. I was lucky." A heavy hand landed on my shoulder. I turned to see Sheriff Miller. He was a big man with a red face and a gut that strained against his uniform buttons. He was also my father's old drinking buddy from the VFW hall. "Hell of a mess, Sergeant," Miller said, chewing on a toothpick. He didn't look at me. He looked at the ruins with the boredom of a man who had seen too many grease fires. "Fire marshal thinks it was a gas leak. Old pipes in these cheap buildings. You know how it is." "A gas leak?" I repeated, keeping my voice flat. "I had the lines inspected 2 months ago, Miller. They were fine." Miller shrugged, a gesture of dismissive authority. "Things break. Be grateful you weren't home. Your dad would be heartbroken." I almost laughed. The irony tasted like bile in my throat. Miller wasn't going to investigate. In this town, the good old boy network protected its own. If Greg Hill said the sky was green, Miller would arrest anyone who called it blue. I nodded, playing the part of the shaken victim. "Yeah, lucky." I pulled away from the crowd and slipped around the back perimeter, toward the dense brush of Selwood Park. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A single text from Milo. "Treehouse." I found him huddled under the old oak tree, shivering in an oversized hoodie. He looked terrified, his eyes darting around as if expecting a boogeyman to jump out. Without a word, he handed me a cracked smartphone. "I took this right before the explosion," Milo whispered. "The guy with the gas can. He met someone on the corner." I swiped the screen. The image was grainy, taken in low light, but the street lamp provided enough illumination to stop my heart. Standing on the corner of 4th and Main was a figure I knew better than my own reflection. The posture was unmistakable, shoulders hunched, leaning against a stop sign with arrogant laziness. He was wearing a bright blue windbreaker with a massive BMW logo on the chest. Liam. My stomach churned. Dad had bought him that jacket 3 months ago for his 26th birthday, along with the car payments I couldn't afford to make. In the photo, Liam was handing a thick white envelope to a man in a dark hoodie. Victor Klein, a known local junkie and petty criminal. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore, it was hard evidence. My brother had paid a hitman to burn me alive, likely using money my father had given him. Suddenly my phone rang. The screen lit up. Liam. I stared at it for 3 rings. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like lava in my veins. I forced a deep breath into my lungs and answered. "Hello? Shara? You are?" You are there? Liam's voice came through the speaker, high-pitched and jittery. I am here, Liam. Why are you calling? Dad told me to call, he stammered. He saw the news. He wanted me to check the body. I mean, check on you. To see if you were okay. Time froze. The world went silent around me. Check the body. It was a slip of the tongue. A Freudian slip from a weak-minded coward who had rehearsed a eulogy instead of a greeting. He had expected a coroner, not a sister. I am fine, Liam, I said, my voice dead calm. I was working a double shift. Tell Dad not to worry. I am perfectly safe. I hung up before I could scream. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to drive to his house and beat him until he couldn't stand. But I knew that wouldn't save me. They would just spin it, call me crazy, use my PTSD against me. I needed more than a grainy photo. I needed to bury them. I have to go back in, I told Milo. Stay here. I approached a young firefighter near the perimeter tape. He looked tired. Can I just grab one thing? Please, my grandfather's medals. He hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. It is unstable. I climbed the blackened stairs to what used to be my apartment. The heat was still radiating from the walls. My furniture was gone. My clothes were ash. But in the corner of the closet, shielded by a fallen beam, I found it. The old metal ammunition box. I pried it open. Inside, the velvet lining was singed, but the silver star and the purple heart were still there. They were slightly melted, the edges warped by the inferno, but the metal had held. I ran my thumb over the ruined surface of the silver star. Grandpa Arthur had given this to me on his deathbed. He was the only man in that family who had ever looked at me with pride. He had taught me to shoot in the backwoods when Greg told me guns were for men. You are a warrior, Kiara, he had told me. Don't let them tell you otherwise. I clutched the melted metal in my fist until the edges dug into my skin. They had taken my home. They had taken my peace. They had tried to take my life for a payout. But they had failed to check one thing. They didn't check if the fire actually killed the soldier. I pocketed the medals and walked out of the ashes. I wasn't going to the police station. I was going to war. I did not go to the police. In a town like this, where the sheriff played poker with my father every Friday night, going to the cops would be like handing the bullet back to the gunman. Instead, I went to the only person I knew whose loyalty could be bought, but whose integrity could not be shaken. Jack Brown was a former military police officer who had been dishonorably discharged for breaking a colonel's jaw during a bar fight. Now, he ran a private investigation firm out of a converted garage in the industrial district. The office smelled of stale coffee and damp cedar. I placed a white envelope on his scarred desk. Inside was $2,000 in cash. My entire savings account, withdrawn from 3 different ATMs that morning. I need to know where the money came from, Jack, I said, my voice tight. My brother Liam paid a hitman to burn down my apartment. I have proof of the handoff, but I don't have the why. Liam has never worked a day in his life. He doesn't have $10, let alone enough to hire an arsonist. Jack looked at the money, then up at me. His eyes were tired, seeing too much of the city's underbelly. If I dig into this hill, and I find out your daddy is involved, are you ready for that? Because once you pull this thread, the whole sweater unravels. I am already unraveling, Jack. Just find the money. It took him 48 hours, 2 days of sitting in my motel room, cleaning my gun, and watching the rain streak against the window. When Jack finally called me back to his office, he didn't offer me coffee. He just threw a thick manila folder onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud that sounded like a judge's gavel. Your brother is underwater, Kara. Deep, Jack said, tapping the first page. He owes $200,000 to a bookie in Vegas, football bets. He thought he was a handicapper, but he is just a loser. The Sharks gave him a deadline. Next week. If he doesn't pay, they are going to start removing body parts. I stared at the numbers. $200,000. But how does killing me solve that? I don't have life insurance. I have a checking account with $12 in it. Jack flipped the page. You don't. But your grandfather did. He pointed to a photocopy of a legal document, yellowed with age. Colonel Arthur Hill left a trust fund. It was set up 20 years ago. The principal amount is $4 million. The room spun. $4 million. The colonel didn't trust your father, Jack explained, his voice grim. He skipped a generation. The trust is set to release the funds to the primary beneficiary, you, upon your 30th birthday. My 30th birthday, next Tuesday. But here is the kicker, Jack continued, his finger tracing a paragraph in small print. The survivorship clause. If the primary beneficiary dies before the activation date, the trust doesn't dissolve. It reverts to the next of kin. 50% to your father, Greg Hill. 50% to your brother, Liam. I felt the blood drain from my face. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. It wasn't personal. It was a business transaction. My father and brother hadn't plotted to burn me alive because they hated me, though they probably did. They did it because my pulse was the only thing standing between them and a $4 million payday. My life had a price tag, and the expiration date was my birthday. They are on a deadline, Jack said softly. If you are alive next Tuesday, the money is yours, and Liam gets his legs broken by the loan sharks. You are walking a tightrope, Sergeant. I left Jack's office in a daze. I drove without a destination, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the city lights into streaks of red and gold. I found myself in the Pearl District, the trendy part of town where the rich kids played. And there it was. Parked illegally in front of a high-end sports bar was the navy blue BMW. Liam's car. I pulled my truck into the shadows across the street and killed the engine. Through the large plate glass window of the bar, I could see them. Liam was sitting in a booth, surrounded by 3 friends. He was wearing that stupid blue jacket. On the table in front of him sat a bucket of ice with a bottle of Dom Perignon. He was laughing, his head thrown back, his mouth open wide. He raised his wrist to show off a watch. It looked like a brand new Rolex, glinting under the bar lights. He was celebrating. He was spending the money he thought he had earned by killing me. In his mind, I was already dead. I was just a pile of ash that had cleared the way for his champagne and his new watch. He wasn't mourning his sister. He was toasting to his inheritance. A wave of nausea hit me, followed immediately by a cold, sharp rage. I remembered the Bible verse my mother used to read to us when we were children, back before she became a ghost in her own house. For the love of money is the root of all evil. I watched my brother pour another glass of wine, spilling some on the table in his excitement. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a child who had finally stolen the cookie jar. But children don't burn down buildings. Monsters do. I started the engine. The vibration of the old truck hummed through my body. You are not going to see a single cent, you bastard, I whispered to the rain. Not one single cent. To catch a monster, sometimes you have to break the heart of the only person who ever loved you. I arranged to meet my mother at a rundown laundromat on the edge of the city limits. It was the perfect cover. The constant rhythmic thump-thump-thump of 20 industrial dryers created a wall of white noise that not even the best parabolic microphone could penetrate. Plus, it was the one place Greg would never be caught dead in. To my father, a public laundromat was beneath him. It was for people who failed at life. I sat on a plastic bench, pretending to read a 2-year-old magazine. At exactly 10 in the morning, the bell above the door jingled. Penelope Hill walked in. She was clutching a laundry basket like a shield. She looked 20 years older than 58. Her graying hair was tucked under a scarf, and her eyes were darting around nervously, checking the corners for shadows. She looked like a fugitive, not a housewife. I stood up and guided her to the back row, near a washing machine that was shaking violently during its spin cycle. I can't stay long, Sierra, she whispered, her hands trembling as she fumbled with a roll of quarters. He thinks I'm at the grocery store. He tracks the mileage on the car. If I am late... Stop, I said, my voice low but hard. Forget about the mileage, Mom. Look at this. I slapped the photo of Liam and the hitman onto the vibrating metal top of the washing machine. Next to it, I placed the copy of the trust fund document Jack had given me. Liam paid a junkie to burn my apartment down, I said, cutting straight to the bone. And Dad knows. Hell, Dad probably gave him the cash. My mother recoiled as if I had slapped her. No. No, Kiera. Your brother has problems, yes, but he wouldn't. And your father? He is a difficult man, but he is a veteran. He has honor. Honor? I laughed, a dry, sharp sound that hurt my throat. Mom, look at the second paper. Grandpa left $4 million. But I have to be dead by next Tuesday for them to get it. They aren't killing me because they hate me. They are killing me because I am a lottery ticket they need to cash in. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. You are imagining things. The trauma, the fire. Stop gaslighting me. I grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at me. I was there, Mom. I heard Milo's warning. Dad called me 2 minutes before the fire started to check if I was home. Why? To say goodnight? He hasn't said goodnight to me since I was 12. She tried to pull away, but I held on. I needed to break through the wall of fear Greg had built around her for 30 years. Answer me, Mom. That night. Did he seem worried? Did he seem like a father concerned for his daughter? Penelope crumpled. She leaned against the washing machine, her body shaking with sobs. He was pacing, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the machines. He kept checking his watch. He was sweating. And when you answered the phone, when you said you were alive, he didn't look relieved, Kiera. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a horror she had been suppressing for days. He looked disappointed. He threw the phone across the room. The truth hung between us, heavy and suffocating. She knew. Deep down, she had always known. She just hadn't wanted to admit that the man she slept next to was capable of murdering their child. I need your help, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a small black device. It was a digital voice recorder, high grade, the kind we used in logistics to record inventory disputes. It was smaller than a matchbox. They are going to try again, I told her. The deadline is Tuesday. They are desperate. They will talk about it tonight. I pressed the device into her clammy hand. Put this in his study, under the desk, behind the books. I don't care. Just get it in there. She stared at the black plastic in her palm as if it were a live grenade. Shara, if he finds this, he will kill me. If you don't do it, he will kill me, I countered, my voice cracking. And you will have to live the rest of your life knowing you could have stopped it. Do you want to visit my grave, Mom? Or do you want to save my life? It was a cruel question. But I was fighting for survival. Penelope closed her eyes. I saw the battle raging inside her, the conditioning of a submissive wife warring against the primal instinct of a mother. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound was the whirring of the dryers. Then she opened her eyes. They were still wet, but the fear had hardened into something else. Anger. He called you useless, she murmured, her fingers curling tight around the recorder. Yesterday, at dinner. He called you a useless waste of space. I didn't say anything then. She looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw the woman she used to be before Greg broke her spirit. She slipped the recorder deep into the pocket of her oversized cardigan. I will do it, she said. I will put it in the bookshelf behind his chair. She grabbed her laundry basket, her knuckles white. She didn't hug me. We were past hugs. We were co-conspirators now. Be careful, Kiara, she whispered. Then she turned and walked out the door, back into the lion's den, carrying the weapon that would either save us or destroy us. I watched her go, my heart hammering against my ribs. She was terrified, but she was moving. If you believe that a mother's love is the strongest force on earth, strong enough to break years of fear, hit that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, if you were in her shoes, would you have the courage to betray your husband to save your child? Type yes if you stand with Penelope. I sat back down on the bench. The trap was set. Now, we just had to wait for the prey to speak. I sat in the cab of my rusted Ford truck, parked 2 blocks down from the house I grew up in. The rain was drumming a relentless rhythm on the metal roof, enclosing me in a cold, damp steel box. The engine was off. The windows were fogged up. In my lap sat a receiver unit I had borrowed, stolen, technically, from the base inventory 2 years ago. I adjusted the frequency dial with a trembling hand. The static hissed in my over-ear headphones like angry hornets, scratching at my brain. Then, it cleared. The sound was crystal clear. The digital recorder my mother had planted was high-grade tech. I could hear the crackle of the fireplace in my father's study. I could hear the heavy clink of ice cubes dropping into a crystal tumbler. Victor is a screw-up, my father's voice cut through the static, rich with disdain. I pay him $2,000 up front to light a match, and he manages to torch the room but miss the girl. You can't find good help these days. He got scared, Dad, Liam's voice whined. He sounded slurred, the telltale sign of too much expensive scotch. He said the sirens were coming too fast. Excuses don't pay your debts, Liam, Greg snapped. The sound of liquid pouring followed. And they certainly don't unlock the trust fund. We are on a clock here. Tuesday is her 30th birthday. The moment that clock strikes midnight on Tuesday, $4 million locks into her account, and we get nothing. Absolutely nothing. I pressed the headphones tighter against my ears, my breath hitching. Hearing it was different from suspecting it. Hearing your father discuss your survival as a financial inconvenience was a knife twisting in your gut. So, what do we do? Liam asked. We can't burn the motel. Too many witnesses. No more fires. Too messy. The police chief is already asking questions I don't like answering, Greg said. There was a pause, then the squeak of his leather armchair as he leaned back. We need something cleaner. An accident. Her truck, Liam said, his voice brightening with a sick sort of excitement. That piece of junk Ford she drives. You know her brake pads are shot. She told Mom she was saving up to fix them next month. Exactly, Greg said. Tomorrow, you go over there. Play the repentant brother. Cry a little. Tell her you want to take her to lunch to apologize. While she's getting ready, you slide under the truck with the bolt cutters. One snip on the rear brake line. Just a little nick. It will hold until she hits the highway. My blood ran cold. I looked at the dashboard of the very truck I was sitting in. They weren't just planning to kill me. They were planning to use my poverty, my inability to afford repairs, as the weapon. What about the funeral? Liam asked, laughing nervously. Funerals are expensive, Dad. That cuts into my share. What Greg said next broke something inside me that I didn't know was still whole. Don't be stupid, Greg scoffed. She is a sergeant. We don't pay for the funeral. Uncle Sam pays for the whole. We get the military honors package. Free plot, free flag, free service. I looked it up. We save about $10,000 on burial costs. That $10,000 covers the closing costs on that condo in Boca Raton I have been looking at. Boca Raton. My life, my service, my entire existence was worth a down payment on a retirement condo in Florida. They were going to bury me in a government-issued plot and use the savings to buy a view of the ocean. To the condo, Liam cheered. The glasses clinked. I ripped the headphones off my head. I threw the door of my truck open and leaned out into the rain. My stomach convulsed violently. I vomited onto the wet asphalt, heaving until there was nothing left but bile and bitterness. The physical disgust was overwhelming. It wasn't just fear. It was a deep, cellular rejection of the people who shared my DNA. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and sat back up. The rain soaked my hair, mixing with the cold sweat on my forehead. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with red, but the tears were gone. The daughter who wanted her father's approval had just died in that puddle outside. The sister who wanted to protect her little brother had been murdered by that toast to a condo in Boca Raton. Greg said to wait until tomorrow. He thought he had time. He thought he was the predator, sitting in his leather chair, drinking his scotch, planning the slaughter of the sheep. He forgot one thing. He didn't raise a sheep, he raised a soldier. And soldiers don't wait to be ambushed. I reached for the ignition. The engine of my death-trap Ford roared to life, sounding like a growl in the quiet street. I wasn't going to wait for Liam to cut my brakes. I wasn't going to wait for Tuesday. I shifted the gear into drive. Plan B is cancelled, Dad, I whispered to the empty cab. I slammed my foot on the gas. I was going home. I did not knock. I drove my truck right up onto the manicured front lawn, the tires tearing deep ruts into the pristine green grass my father prized more than his children. I killed the engine, grabbed the manila envelope and the portable Bluetooth speaker from the passenger seat, and stepped out into the storm. I was not wearing my civilian clothes. I had changed back at the motel into my full-service dress uniform. My boots were polished to a black mirror shine. My ribbons were perfectly aligned on my chest. I wasn't walking in there as a daughter coming home. I was walking in as a sergeant entering a hostile zone. I used my spare key. The heavy oak door swung open with a silent, well-oiled glide. The living room was warm, bathed in the soft, golden glow of expensive lamps. It smelled of leather polish and aged scotch. Greg and Liam were sitting in the matching recliner chairs, glasses in hand, laughing at something on the television. They looked comfortable. They looked like men who had just successfully negotiated a business merger, not men who had just conspired to murder a family member for a condo in Florida. They froze when they saw me. Greg lowered his glass, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "What the hell are you doing, Ciara? Bursting in here like a maniac. I told you to come tomorrow. Get out." His voice was a boom of thunder, the same voice that had made me cower under my bedsheets when I was 6. But I wasn't 6 anymore. I walked to the glass coffee table that separated us. I didn't say a word. I raised the manila envelope and let the photos slide out. They fanned out across the table, glossy, high-definition prints of Liam handing the envelope of cash to the arsonist. Smack, smack, smack. Liam's face went the color of curdled milk. He shrank back into his chair, looking from the photos to me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "What is this?" Greg snarled, standing up. "You are spying on your brother now? You paranoid little—" "Sit down," I ordered. My voice wasn't loud, but it was steel. I placed the Bluetooth speaker on the table, right on top of the photos. I pulled out my phone and hit play. I turned the volume all the way up. Uncle Sam pays for the whole. We get the military honors package. We save about $10,000 on burial costs. Greg's voice filled the room, amplified and distorted, bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. "That 10 grand covers the closing costs on that condo in Boca Raton." The silence that followed was deafening. The air was sucked out of the room. Greg stared at the speaker, his eyes bulging. The mask of the respectable, grieving father slipped, revealing the greedy, soulless calculator underneath. "You wiretapped me," Greg whispered, his shock quickly turning into a blind, white-hot rage. "In my own house, you ungrateful bitch!" He lunged at me. It was instinct. He raised his hand, aiming a backhand slap at my face, the same discipline he had used when I was a teenager. He expected me to flinch. He expected me to cry. I didn't flinch. I caught his wrist in midair. My grip was iron. I twisted his arm back, using his own momentum to force him off balance. The look of confusion in his eyes was priceless. He had forgotten that while he was drinking scotch for the last 10 years, I was doing push-ups in the mud and learning hand-to-hand combat. "Don't you ever touch me again," I hissed, looking straight into his dilated pupils. "I am your father," he screamed, spitting saliva. "I gave you life. I own you." I tightened my grip until I felt the bones in his wrist grind together. "You didn't give me life. Mom gave me life. You just provided the sperm and the pain." I shoved him backward. He stumbled and fell hard onto the leather sofa, knocking over his glass of scotch. The expensive liquid soaked into the rug like a dark stain. "Liam, run!" Greg yelled, grasping at straws. "Get out the back!" Liam scrambled up, knocking over his chair. He sprinted toward the kitchen, heading for the patio door that led to the backyard. He made it to the doorway and stopped dead. My mother was standing there. Penelope Hill, the woman who had spent 30 years making herself small so she wouldn't be a target, was blocking the exit. She stood tall, her arms crossed. In her right hand, she held her cell phone. The screen was lit up. "Mom, move!" Liam shouted, panic rising in his voice. "She is crazy. We have to go." Penelope didn't move an inch. She looked at her golden child with eyes that were full of sorrow but devoid of pity. "You aren't going anywhere, Liam," she said, her voice steady. "I have already called them. They are in the driveway." Greg pulled himself up from the couch, staring at his wife as if she were a stranger. "Penelope, you betrayed me? For her? For that useless girl?" "No, Greg," she answered, and a tear finally escaped, rolling down her cheek. "I am protecting my child from a monster. And the monster is you." Before Greg could answer, the room was washed in a strobe of red and blue light. The wail of sirens cut through the storm outside, loud and piercing. Car doors slammed. Voices shouted commands from the front porch. Greg looked at the window, bathed in the flashing police lights. He looked old. He looked small. His kingdom of fear had crumbled in less than 5 minutes. I stood in the center of the room, my chest heaving, watching the two men who had tried to sell my life for a condo cower as the heavy pounding began on the front door. "Police! Open up!" This is the moment we have been waiting for. The moment the bully gets punched back. If you felt a rush of satisfaction watching Kara take down her father, hit that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, what would you have said to Greg if you were the one standing in that room? Type your message to him below. I walked to the door and unlocked it. Justice had arrived. The Multnomah County Courthouse smelled of wet wool, floor wax, and stale anxiety. Outside, the Portland rain was falling in relentless gray sheets, washing the grime off the city streets. But inside courtroom 4B, the filth was being exposed for everyone to see. I sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecutor's table. My back was ramrod straight, a posture drilled into me by years of service, but my hands were clasped tight in my lap to stop them from shaking. Opposite me, sitting at the defense table, were two men wearing Department of Corrections orange jumpsuits. Their wrists were bound by steel handcuffs, chained to a metal loop at their waists. Greg Hill did not look like the tyrant who had ruled our household with an iron fist anymore. Without his expensive Italian suits and his glass of scotch, he looked shrunken. His skin was sallow, his hair thin and messy. He refused to look at me. Liam, on the other hand, was a mess. He was sobbing quietly, wiping his nose on the rough fabric of his jumpsuit shoulder, looking like a terrified child who had finally been caught breaking the rules. The trial had been swift. With the audio recording from the study and my mother's tearful testimony, there was nowhere to hide. But the spectacle really began when the district attorney offered them a chance to speak before sentencing. That was when the family loyalty Greg preached about evaporated like mist. "It was not my idea," Greg suddenly shouted, jumping to his feet. His chains rattled loudly against the wooden table, a jarring sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. He pointed a trembling finger at Liam. "It was him. It was the boy. He is a gambling addict, Your Honor. He owed $200,000 to violent people. He threatened me. I am an old man. I was scared of my own son." A gasp went through the gallery. I felt a wave of nausea roll through my stomach. He was throwing his golden child under the bus to save his own skin. Liam's head snapped up. The shock on his face quickly turned to ugly, desperate rage. "You liar!" Liam screamed back, his voice cracking. "You planned the whole thing. You said if Kara died, we could use the insurance and the trust fund to buy that condo in Boca Raton. You said she was worth more dead than alive." "Silence!" The judge banged his gavel, but the damage was done. The jury looked at them with undisguised disgust. The mask of the respectable military family had been ripped away, revealing the rotting core underneath. They were not father and son anymore. They were just two rats fighting over a sinking ship. Then came the moment that silenced the room. The prosecution calls Milo Sutton to the stand. The heavy wooden doors opened and Milo walked in. He was not wearing his oversized hoodie today. I had bought him a crisp white button-down shirt and dress pants. He looked small in the witness chair, his feet barely touching the floor, but his eyes were clear. Greg's defense attorney, a sleek man in a $2,000 suit, tried to tear him apart. It was his last desperate play to save his client. Mr. Sutton, the lawyer sneered, pacing in front of the boy. You live in a park, do you not? You are a runaway, a transient. Why should this court believe the word of a homeless child who would say anything for a hot meal? The room went quiet. I wanted to stand up and object, but Milo did not flinch. He leaned into the microphone. I do not have a house, sir, Milo said, his voice ringing clear and true. But I know what a family is. I see them in the park every day. Families protect each other. They do not pour gas on each other for money. Milo turned his gaze directly to Greg. Greg flinched, unable to meet the boy's eyes. That man is not a father, Milo said. He is a monster. The lawyer had no more questions. An hour later, Judge Harrison returned with the sentencing. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the two men in orange. Greg Hill, for conspiracy to commit murder and arson, I sentence you to 22 years in the state penitentiary, without the possibility of parole. Greg slumped forward, putting his head on the table. Liam Hill, 16 years. Bang! The sound of the gavel striking the woodblock echoed like a gunshot. It sounded like the lid of a coffin slamming shut on the darkest chapter of my life. Bailiffs moved in. Greg and Liam were hauled away. They did not look at me. They were too busy shouting obscenities at their lawyers. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for a week. I walked out of the courthouse and stood on the concrete steps. The rain hit my face, cool and cleansing. Technically, I had won. The trust fund, $4 million, was mine. My tormentors were in cages. But as I watched the gray clouds swirl above Portland, I did not feel triumphant. I felt a vast, echoing emptiness. I had just sent my father and brother to prison. There was no family dinner waiting for me. No apology would ever make this right. I remembered a quote by Martin Luther King Jr. that I had read in college. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. It had bent toward justice today. But nobody told me that justice would feel so incredibly lonely. The Oregon State Penitentiary sat like a concrete scar against the gray skyline of Salem. It was a place designed to strip away humanity, replacing names with numbers and lives with routines. It had been 6 months since the gavel fell. 6 months since I inherited $4 million. 6 months of silence. I walked through the metal detector, my boots echoing on the linoleum floor. The air smelled of industrial bleach and unwashed bodies, a scent that clung to the back of your throat. I surrendered my ID to a guard who looked like he hadn't smiled since the Reagan administration. Visitor for inmate Hill, I said. My voice was steady, my hands were dry. I was led into the visitation room, a long sterile hallway divided by a thick wall of bulletproof glass. On one side, the free, on the other, the damned. I sat down on the metal stool. A moment later, a door buzzed open on the other side, and Greg Hill shuffled in. He looked terrible. The prison diet and the lack of alcohol had hollowed him out. His skin was the color of old parchment, and his hair, once dyed a rich chestnut to hide his age, was now stark white and thinning. But as he sat down and picked up the black receiver phone, I saw his eyes. They were the same. Cold, calculating, full of a bottomless hunger for control. I picked up my phone. The connection crackled. You look expensive, Greg said. It was his greeting. No hello, no how are you? Just an assessment of my blazer. Did you buy that with my money? Or did you spend it all on a lawyer to keep your brother in a cage? I looked at him, searching for a flicker of remorse. I found none. He was still the center of his own universe. In his mind, he was the victim of an ungrateful daughter and a cruel system. I didn't come here to talk about money, Greg, I said, and I didn't come here to argue. He sneered, revealing teeth that were yellowing. Then why are you here? To gloat? To see the old man rot? You must feel big now, Thierry. The big hero sergeant. I came to give you something, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small rectangular photograph. It was creased at the corners, the colors faded to sepia tones. It was a picture taken 24 years ago. I was 5 years old, sitting on his shoulders at a parade. I was laughing. He was smiling. It was the only evidence I had that he hadn't always hated me. I pressed the photo against the glass. Greg squinted at it. For a second, his expression faltered. I kept this in my wallet through basic training, I told him, my voice low and even. I kept it through my deployments. I kept it when you told me I was useless. I kept it because I thought if I just worked hard enough, if I was just good enough, the man in this picture would come back. Greg's face hardened again. Stop the melodrama. I am finished, I continued, ignoring him. I realized something during the trial. That man in the photo never existed. You were smiling because you looked like a good father to the neighbors. You never loved me, Greg. You only loved the reflection of yourself you saw in my eyes. And when I started to have my own mind, my own reflection, you hated me for it. I gave you a roof over your head. He barked into the receiver, his voice rising. I fed you. And then you tried to sell my life for a condo in Florida. I cut him off. But that is okay, because I forgive you. Greg blinked, stunned. What? I forgive you, I repeated. Not because you deserve it. You don't. You are a small, sad, narcissistic man who will die in a concrete box. I forgive you because I refuse to carry you with me anymore. If I hate you, I am still tied to you. I am still your victim. But if I forgive you, you are nothing. I pulled the photo away from the glass and tore it in half. Then I tore it again. I let the pieces flutter to the dirty floor on my side of the partition. Goodbye, Greg. You are dead to me now. I hung up the phone. I stood up and turned my back on him. Through the glass, I could hear him screaming, even without the phone. I saw him slam his fist against the partition, his face twisted into a mask of pure, impotent rage. Come back here. I am your father. You owe me. You owe me. I walked toward the exit. The sound of his screaming faded with every step, swallowed by the heavy steel doors. By the time I reached the parking lot, there was only silence. I stepped outside. For the first time in weeks, the sun had broken through the Oregon clouds. The light hit my face, warm and brilliant. I took a deep breath. The air didn't smell like bleach anymore. It smelled like rain and pine trees. It smelled like freedom. I got into my new truck, a sturdy, reliable Chevy, not a death trap, and drove 40 minutes out to the suburbs. I pulled into the driveway of the small ranch-style house I had bought a month ago. The front yard was bursting with color. My mother, Penelope, was on her knees in the flower bed, wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat and gardening gloves. She wasn't the trembling ghost who hid in the laundry room anymore. Her cheeks were flushed with color. She had gained weight. She looked alive. She heard the truck door close and looked up. A smile spread across her face, genuine and bright. How did it go? She asked, standing up and wiping dirt from her apron. I walked over to her and wrapped my arms around her. She smelled of lavender and potting soil. She felt solid. It is done, Mom, I whispered into her shoulder. We are safe. He can't hurt us anymore. She held me tighter, resting her chin on my head. Two survivors, standing in the sunlight, finally ready to start living. Welcome home, Ciara, she said. And for the first time in my life, I knew I truly was. The warehouse smelled of diesel fumes, cardboard, and fresh coffee. To most people, it was just an industrial scent, but to me, it smelled like redemption. I stood on the metal catwalk overlooking the floor of Hill Logistics and Security. Below me, a dozen men and women in high-visibility vests were moving crates with practiced efficiency. Most of them had limps, scars, or the 1,000-yard stare that I knew all too well. They were veterans who had been chewed up by the system, or kids from the streets who had been told they were worthless. I used every cent of the $4 million to build this. I didn't buy a condo in Boca Raton. I bought a future for people who thought they didn't have one. Hey, boss! A voice shouted from the loading dock. I looked down to see Milo holding a clipboard, directing a delivery driver twice his size. He was 14 now, having hit a growth spurt that made him gangly and awkward, but his eyes were sharp. He wasn't the terrified boy shivering in the park anymore. He was confident. He was safe. And the adoption papers on my desk said he was legally mine. Inventory is checked in, Ciara, he yelled up, grinning. We are ahead of schedule. I smiled back. It was a real smile, one that reached my eyes. Good work, wrap it up. We have a dinner to get to. 2 years had passed since the trial. 2 years of therapy, hard work, and rebuilding the foundation of my life from the ground up. I walked down the stairs and headed for the exit, where a silver pickup truck was waiting. Leaning against the hood was a man who looked entirely out of place in a shipping yard, yet somehow fit perfectly. Reese Bennett was an architect I had hired 6 months ago to design the expansion of our facility. He was tall, with kind eyes and hands that were calloused from work but gentle in their touch. He didn't have a military background. He didn't know how to strip a rifle. But he knew how to build things that lasted. You are staring again, Sergeant, Reese teased as I approached. Just assessing the perimeter, I replied, trying to keep my voice stern, though I failed miserably. Reese opened the door for me. Early in our relationship, I'd pushed him away. I told him I was damaged goods, that I came with too much baggage and a family history that read like a horror movie. He had just taken my hand, looked at the invisible walls I had erected, and said the words that finally disarmed me. Ciara, you have spent your whole life building a fortress to protect yourself. That is impressive. But you can't live in a bunker forever. Let me help you build a garden inside those walls. Today was the first harvest of that garden. We drove to the suburbs, to the house with the wraparound porch. As soon as I opened the front door, the smell hit me. Roast turkey, sage stuffing, and sweet cranberry sauce. It was the scent of a holiday, but for the first time in 30 years, it didn't smell like tension. In my childhood, Thanksgiving was a minefield. We walked on eggshells, terrified that the turkey would be too dry or the football game would go the wrong way, setting Greg off into a rage. But today, there was football playing on the TV, and the only sound was cheering. My mother, Penelope, walked out of the kitchen carrying a massive platter of green bean casserole. She looked radiant. The gray in her hair was gone, replaced by a soft honey blonde, and she moved with a purpose that Greg had tried to crush out of her. Everything is ready, she announced, kissing my cheek. Reese, pour the drinks. Milo, wash your hands. We sat around the large oak dining table. It was set with the good china, not for show, but because we felt like celebrating. There was no head of the table. We sat in a circle. We passed the dishes around, piling our plates high. For 20 minutes, we just ate and laughed. Reese told a funny story about a construction mishap, and my mother laughed so hard she had to wipe her eyes. It was a sound I hadn't heard in decades. Then, the room quieted down. It was time for the toast. Usually, this was the part where Greg would make a speech about how much money he had made that year, or how disappointed he was in us. My stomach tightened out of reflex, a phantom pain from the past. But Greg wasn't here. He was in a cell in Salem. Milo stood up. He held a glass of sparkling apple cider. He looked at Reese, then at my mother, and finally, his gaze landed on me. He took a deep breath, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. I want to say thank you, Milo started, his voice cracking slightly. 3 years ago, I was eating out of a dumpster behind a gas station. I didn't think I would make it to 12. He paused, gripping his glass tighter. Thank you for saving me, he said, looking right at me. Thank you for the job. Thank you for the roof. But mostly, thank you for being my mom. The word hung in the air, warm and golden. Mom. He hadn't called me that before. It had always been Ciara, or Sergeant. The tears I'd held back in the motel room, the tears I'd refused to shed in the courtroom, finally broke free. But they weren't hot or painful. They were cool, healing tears. I reached out and took Milo's hand. I didn't save you, Milo, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. You saved me. Reese put his hand over mine. My mother placed hers on top of his. 4 hands linked together over a table full of food. This wasn't the family I was born into. It was the family I'd fought for. It was the family I had built from the ashes of the old one. And as I looked around the table, at the faces of the people who loved me, not for what I could give them, but for who I was, I realized something profound. The fire had taken my house, but it had given me a home. Portland, Oregon, is a city defined by its gray skies. The locals say the rain washes the world clean, but for most of my life, the rain just felt like a cold, wet blanket designed to smother hope. But today, on my 35th birthday, the sky was a brilliant, unblemished blue. I stood on a raised wooden platform in the center of Selwood Park. 5 years ago, just a few yards from where I was standing, a terrified little boy had huddled in a phone booth and made a call that saved my life. Back then, this park was a graveyard for the forgotten, a place of mud, needles, and despair. Today, behind me, stood a gleaming 3-story building made of cedar and glass. A large sign over the double doors read, "The Selwood Sanctuary." It was a shelter and vocational training center for homeless youth. It was state-of-the-art. It had warm beds, a fully stocked kitchen, a counseling center, and a computer lab. I smoothed the skirt of my navy blue dress. I wasn't wearing my uniform today. I wasn't Sergeant Hill, the logistics specialist. I was just Kiera. A crowd had gathered on the lawn. There were city council members, local business owners, and journalists. But my eyes skipped over them and landed on the front row. That was where my real wealth sat. Reese was there, looking handsome in a charcoal suit. In his arms, he held a squirming 2-year-old girl with curly hair and eyes that sparkled with mischief. Dahlia, my daughter. She was pointing at me and giggling, blissfully unaware that her mother had once been worth more dead than alive. Next to them sat a young man wearing an orange and black hooded sweatshirt emblazoned with Oregon State University. Milo. He wasn't the scrawny, dirty kid anymore. He was a sophomore in college, studying social work. He sat tall, his shoulders broad, looking at me with a pride that made my throat tighten. And next to him was Penelope, my mother. She was holding an oversized pair of ceremonial scissors, her face glowing with a vitality that 20 years of marriage to Greg had almost extinguished. I stepped up to the microphone. The feedback whined for a split second, then settled into silence. The crowd quieted down. 5 years ago, I began, my voice echoing across the park. I stood in this neighborhood and watched my life burn to the ground. I was betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect me. I was told that I was useless. I was told that my value could be calculated on a spreadsheet. I paused, looking at the new building. My grandfather, Colonel Arthur Hill, left behind a legacy of $4 million. He hoped it would secure the future of his family. For a long time, that money was a curse. It was a poison that turned a father against his daughter and a brother against his sister. I took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill my lungs. But fire does 2 things. It destroys, yes, but it also purifies. It clears away the dead wood so that something new can grow. I learned the hard way that family is not the blood that runs in your veins. Family is not a last name. Family are the people who are willing to bleed for you when the world turns against you. I looked down at Milo, then at Reese and Dahlia. The money that was meant to buy a condo in Florida has built this home instead. It will ensure that children like my son, Milo, never have to sleep in the rain again. It will ensure that no one is ever told they are worthless. I remembered the Bible verse my mother used to whisper when she thought no one was listening. There is an old saying, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." The truth freed me. It freed my mother. And today, I hope this sanctuary frees many more. The applause started slowly, then swelled into a roar. I didn't care about the clapping. I walked down the steps of the platform and went straight to my family. Reese kissed my forehead and handed me Dahlia. She wrapped her tiny arms around my neck, smelling of baby shampoo and sunshine. I buried my face in her hair. She would never know the sound of a raised voice in anger. She would never know what it felt like to be a bargaining chip. She would only know love. I looked up at the sky one last time. Somewhere, beyond the blue, I hoped Grandpa Arthur was watching. His fortune hadn't been squandered on gambling debts or vanity. It had been planted in the earth, and it was finally bearing fruit. "Ready to go home?" Reese asked, putting his arm around my waist. "Yeah," I said, taking my mother's arm with my free hand while Milo walked beside us. "Let's go home." We turned and walked away from the podium, 4 people bound not by tragedy, but by choice. Behind us, the glass windows of the sanctuary reflected the sun, burning with a light that would never go out. The rain in Portland had finally stopped. My journey taught me a hard but necessary truth. Biology is not destiny. For years, I clung to toxic relationships because of a misguided sense of duty, believing that walking away made me the villain. But I learned that stepping away from those who hurt you is not an act of betrayal. It is an act of survival. We all have the power to redefine what family means. It is not about whose DNA we share, but whose hand is holding ours when the storm hits. Your worth is innate, not something you have to purchase with your silence or your suffering. Thank you for walking this difficult but beautiful path with me today. If my story touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to this channel so we can share more stories of resilience together. I would love to hear from you in the comments. What is the one quality you value most in a family member? Is it loyalty, honesty, or kindness? Let's start a conversation below. And finally, as we step into this fresh chapter of 2026, I wish you and your loved ones a happy new year filled with peace, truth, and genuine love.